Driving test examiners are looking for these 3 things in order for you to pass your driving test. This first tip is the most important tip I can ever give anyone to make sure that you are driving test ready. Because any examiner in the right mind is going to be able to tell if you can do this in less than 2 minutes of driving. And I call it not being a stone. Okay, maybe not the most catchy name, but I'll explain. Imagine you're in a water pipe. Now this water pipe takes water to the shower, but there's a big fat stone in the water pipe and it's stuck in there. Now what's happening to the flow of water to your shower? I'll tell you what's happening, it's slowing down. And what happens to your shower? You're getting a bad shower. Does anybody out there like a bad shower? No, bad showers suck. Now when you're learning to drive, you are the so-called stone in the water pipe. Because you're on the roads, you're slower than everyone else, you're making lots of mistakes, that's normal, that's the right thing. And as we get better and better and we're learning to drive, we become less of a stone and more of a tiny pebble. Until eventually, we're not even a pebble anymore. We're just flowing down them roads just like everyone else. And that's when you do things like you're going down the dual carriageway and it's a 50-mile-per-hour speed limit, but for some reason you choose to go 35 or 40. Well, what are you doing to everyone? You're slowing them down. When you go into a 30 zone and you decide to do 20 when it's perfectly clear, no reason at all, but you're being extra cautious. What are you doing? No, you're just actually slowing everyone down and you're not keeping up with the flow of traffic. And you might think that's being extra safe, but actually it's not, because then people want to overtake you and it just causes havoc. And the same can be said for going too fast. When the flow of traffic in a 30 is 30 and you're trying to go 40, well then you're either up someone's backside or overtaking and just generally wrecking the flow of traffic. If you don't believe me, next time you go out, have a look for that person who's not keeping up with the traffic and they're either going extra slow or they're driving really erratically, they're overtaking and they're going too fast, and tell me how they're affecting the flow of traffic. Now, any driving test examiner or driving instructor out there is going to be able to tell that about you within around 2 minutes of driving. Now, when you're actually keeping up with the flow of traffic and you're not acting like a stone in the road, that's what we call being an independent driver. And that, my friends, is the absolute key to passing your driving test. What you don't want to do is go onto your driving test, driving around, sticking out like a sore thumb. Now, our next big tip is to change how we think about the driving test. Bear with me. Now, we've all done exams throughout our whole life, you know, starting at key stage 2, we're doing our SATs, and then we move up, we get older, and we do our freaking GCSEs. I don't know about you, but I absolutely hate exams. And lucky for you, the first thing you need to do is scrap everything you know about exams, because the driving test is completely different. In fact, it's so different, it shouldn't actually be called an exam. It shouldn't be called a test. You're not being tested. I'll explain. In a normal exam, you start with 0%. You revise and you revise. You squeeze every bit of information you possibly can into that tiny little head of ours. And the more you revise, the more you memorize, the better chances you've got of getting that A star. I was terrible at exams, and luckily the driving test is not like one of these exams. In fact, you shouldn't need to remember anything for the driving test. Driving is much more like learning to walk, learning to ride a bike, learning to run, learning to swim. Once you can do it, you can just do it. Ask someone in the family who drives. Ask them if they think about changing gear or if they think about when they approach a roundabout. They're gonna say no. They're thinking about what's for tea or what radio station should I listen to or what excuse can I come up with why I'm 10 minutes late for work today. Oh, fuck! My point is, you will know when you're ready for your driving test because you will no longer be thinking about every single thing you're having to do during your driving. And this actually happens in 4 stages when you're learning to drive. Your first stage is when you make mistakes. You don't actually know you're making them, and it takes your instructor or someone to say, hey, Tommy, you're making a mistake. You shouldn't be going on the curb there. This is what you're doing wrong. This is how not to do it. And then your stage 2 is you carry on making the mistakes, but this time you say to the driving instructor, oh, I've just gone on the curb again. Oh, I've got to not do that again. And because you now realize what you're doing, you can fix them. And that's when you're aiming for stage 3, which is when you actually have to start thinking about not doing it, but you no longer go on the curb because you're focusing. You're thinking, I must not go on the friggin' curb. And that's a good stage to be at, but that's not driving test ready. The final stage is stage 4, which is involuntary driving, when you are no longer thinking about not going on that curb and you can carry on driving without actually thinking about it. And that happens with all the skills that you need with driving. All you have to do is get to the stage 4 in enough of those skills that you can actually drive independently. If you're enjoying this and this is helping, I have all this information and a whole bunch more that I couldn't squeeze into the video in my online driving course, which you can see in the link there or down below there. Just have a click there if you want to have a look. So if you're going to take anything away from this, when you go for your driving test, try not stress about everything you need to remember, because that shouldn't be the case. You've got everything you need already in here. You're proving that every time you go out and you don't crash the car. And when you go into that driving test centre and you meet Carl, the driving test examiner, and he's looking at you, what do you think he's seeing? Do you think he's seeing a D grade student or oh, this is a C grade student? No, you're there for a driving test. Carl's expecting you to be an A-star student. You're there because you're ready to have your license. You start with 100 out of 100 marks on your driving test. You are no longer the stone in the road. All you have to do is continue showing Carl, the examiner, what you've been doing with your driving instructor for the last God knows how many hours. And then you will keep your 100 out of 100 marks. If you start doing silly risks or nervous mistakes, it's going to start taking marks off you. That's not what we want. So as my saying goes, the glass isn't half empty, the glass isn't half full, the glass is full to the brim, so keep it that way. Okay, my third and final driving test tip for today, because this is all we can squeeze into this video, and that is, it's okay to ask. So people often get confused about what it's okay to speak to the examiner about, and should I even speak to the examiner, and what questions can I and can't I ask them? So we're going to clarify everything you need to know right now. But the first thing we need to make sure we understand is the driving test is all about safety. It's about minimizing risk. It's not about how good we are at directions. And that's really important to remember. So people often get confused about what they can talk to the examiner about, because after all, the examiner's there to do a job. You know, they do have a specific criteria that they have to stand by, which essentially means they can't help you to drive. And the way to think about that is the driving examiner is not like your driving instructor. Your driving instructor is there to help you, teach you to drive. They'll help you on the road if there's a mistake or something that you need to fix. The examiner won't. The examiner will just mark it down as a fault. For instance, the examiner is not going to tell you if there's a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit change coming up. You couldn't ask the examiner if you should go at the green light or stop at a red light. And if you did try and ask the examiner one of these questions that is driving related, they're just going to look at you really, really blankly. And then I don't know what they're going to be thinking, but I wouldn't be thinking, oh yeah, this person's ready for their driving test. However, you can ask the examiner unlimited questions about directions, because actually it doesn't matter where you go on your driving test as long as you go safely. The sat-nav and the directions are just there to give you some direction, otherwise where would you go? For example, we're coming up to a roundabout and the sat-nav says third exit, but our mind's gone blank. We're blank. And we've forgotten which exit. Or the roundabout's really confusing. We get lots of confusing roundabouts. You are absolutely fine and well within your right to say to the examiner, can you remind me which exit? Was it the third exit? Is it this next exit? Is it the next road on the left? The examiner is not going to have any problems with answering questions related to directions. I've had people on test ask a question at every junction to double check. Is it this one? Is it this one? Is it the next one? Because they are not related to your safety driving on the roads. The only really important part with this is that you ask early enough. If you've left it too late to actually take a turning and you try and turn off dangerously, that is not going to bode well for your driving test. So make sure you ask in plenty of time. Now, examiners are expected as part of their job to try and make a bit of small talk with you. They're going to ask some basic questions. Normally, the first one is, so what would you normally be doing today if you weren't here? Answer them how you like. Make it up if you want to. Or don't answer at all. It doesn't matter. And then people stress, should I be talking to the examiner or should I stay quiet? And again, that is completely up to you. At the end of the day, why are you there? You're there to complete your driving test. So if you can make small talk with the examiner without affecting your focus on the road, fine, go ahead. But if you're anything like me and you cannot multitask, then my head would be fully on that road. It's also absolutely fine to commentate on your driving. If you're not sure what that means, it's just speaking out loud as you're going down the road. Okay, roundabout coming up, I need to take the third exit, so I'm gonna need the right lane, so I'm just checking my mirrors and popping a signal on. Loads of people do this. They're trained to do this in the police. They're trained to do this as ambulance drivers, just because they need so much focus on those roads. Imagine going through red lights and those crossings and you need that super duper focus so you don't make a mistake. And it also helps relieve some of the nerves and the stress because your focus is on what you're doing and you're not playing over things in your head. If you missed it earlier, have a look at my A to Z driving course, everything you need for your driving test. If you want some examiner tips about how to reverse bay park, have a look at this video here. I'm Josh, your driving instructor, and I will see you all soon. Boom.